wasn't an MC. There was an open bar for season ticket holders and Thunder workers. This was a spectacle. This was a Paul George. We are laying out the blue/red carpet for you from the day you get here before the ball even tips off. It was a clear indication to me that the Thunder is trying to make an impression on this guy that obviously they're a top-class organization. He's known that from the beginning and from talking to guys like Kevin Durant and Reggie Jackson before he even got here. But the Thunder is saying, look, we're not LA, but we can do it big too, and we can make a big impression on you, and we're not going to spare any expense in terms of making you feel welcome even before you play a game for us.
Barry, when we had a chance to hear from Sam Presti after the party had sort of ceased to have Paul George as part of it, it was still going on, but Paul George had left the party. Sam Presti, you asked him about the recruitment of Paul George, and he played, he played dumb.
He played real dumb.
He played dumb about the recruitment of Paul George, but what was the thinking behind this? I mean, in your mind, was this a positive move by the Thunder to do what they did?
I don't see how it can hurt. Is it going to affect Paul George? I don't see how. But it is a good way to kick off his tenure in Oklahoma City. And I thought the venue was important. There's a lot of different places we could have gone, and some would have been a little more spacious. I mean, I don't know where you guys were exactly, but I was jam-packed. I was a sardine for about 45 minutes. But the Jones Assembly, if you don't know, it's a brand new venue opening. It's a restaurant slash concert hall. It's got ability to roll up the sides and go out into an outdoor courtyard, so you can put a lot of people in there. And it was fairly hip. It was fairly trendy, and it was, fairly cool. And I think that was part of the message to Paul George that, hey, Oklahoma City is not just a bunch of stockyards and barns. That all kinds of cool things happening in Oklahoma City. Paul George admits, I don't know anything about this place other than I came, once a year and played basketball here for the last 7 years. Stayed in the hotel and went to the arena. So I think that was a message to Paul George that, hey, this is a happening place. It's not Los Angeles. Nobody's pretending it is. But we do have some things beyond, just barns and a basketball arena.
Yeah. And Sam Presti said it himself. He kind of admitted his nerddom during that time that we were talking to him. He was like, I'm not the life of the party. I'm not the life of the party. I'm Sam Presti, general manager, but they like it. This is what they like. And they could be the people that he works around that are younger guys. They could be NBA players that he's trying to, make an impression to by doing this. But Sam Presti basically said, this isn't necessarily my thing, but this is a thing. He did acknowledge the fact that was very important for them to do it that way.
Well, and I think what you guys are saying about sort of the scene and what Oklahoma City is about, that'll come to Paul George or any other player's knowledge, but it's going to come down to basketball. And Sam Presti got around to that, sort of talking about the excitement of the night, that at the end of the day, they're going to come together for preseason. They're going to have to figure out how to keep people from getting to the basket easy, to not turning the ball over. I understand that, and that is going to take some time, but at least for now, there's an excitement about this guy, and I think the Thunder reflected that to him and to the fans, and so it was kind of fun to see. It was interesting to see something different as it related to a guy that hasn't even dribbled the basketball once for the Oklahoma City Thunder. So, interesting night. Eric, you mentioned earlier Raymond Felton, Patrick Patterson, who I'm going to call Ruben Patterson at some point in these proceedings. I
don't know if Patrick will like that very much, but that's fine. You give it a shot. Give it a try.
I haven't thought of Ruben Patterson for years until the other morning he popped in my head, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to say Ruben Patterson at some point. But these two guys, they had a much more subdued official introduction on Tuesday morning over at Aloft Hotel. A fun setting, though.
Yeah.
Showed the entire downtown, Bricktown, the city skyline. It was pretty cool, but much more sort of normal, I guess, if you will, and what the Thunder usually does. But while not of the caliber player of Paul George, Barry, these two guys, how important was it to nail down Patrick Patterson, Raymond Felton?
Well, when you look at this Thunder team, is very deep inside. Then all of a sudden, out the door goes Domantas Sabonis. Out the door goes Taj Gibson. So you go from really deep to really thin at power forward, especially. You're looking at Jeremy Grant and really not much else. So to get Patrick Patterson on a free agent contract, a good free agent contract, $16 million over 3 years, an outstanding contract for the value. So that was a big pickup. Patrick Patterson, I don't think is as good a player as Taj Gibson overall. He's not as good of a defender. He's a versatile defender, but he's not as good. And offensively, he's probably not as good as Taj Gibson. But he is better at what the Thunder needs the most, which is spacing the floor and three-point shooting. He's a pretty effective three-point shooter. So he's a great fit for the Thunder. And to get a guy like that who I think can step into the starting lineup and be a solid pro is exactly what they needed. And Raymond Felton, we've talked about it. They needed somebody that could run the point when Russell Westbrook sits down. Raymond Felton can do that and do it well. He's 33. He's not the player he used to be, but he's still a pretty good player.
Yeah. Eric, is the roles for these two guys, are they pretty clear in your mind? Patrick Patterson, starter at the 4, Raymond Felton, backup point guard?
Yeah. Those are the roles that they're going to be brought in to do, and I think they're going to fill them pretty well. These guys seem to be consummate professionals. Just talking to them, and in the time that we had them, I think they're going to be comfortable in their roles. I think Raymond Felton, being a 12-year veteran, he's at a point in his career where he's not going to be expected to come in and be a starter. Basically, they just need a competent body at that position, something that they didn't have last year. And Felton's job, frankly, might be even easier if Paul George gets a bulk of some of the ball handling responsibilities when Russell Westbrook isn't on the floor either. And so I think Raymond Felton's going to be in a really good position, and sometimes even as the third point guard if Paul George gets the ball in his hands. And he's a significant upgrade over Samaje Christian in terms of a guy who can be able to create not just for himself, but for the guys around him as well.
Well, we'll talk about Samaje in just a second as it relates to the Thunder roster as a whole, but I had a moment watching those two guys in that press conference Tuesday morning, and maybe it was just me, but I'm sitting there looking at, I know it's an aging Raymond Felton, but Raymond Felton and Patrick Patterson, who pretty good player, both of them in my estimation in terms of especially filling needs and roles that the Thunder needs. And I thought, if they hadn't done the Paul George deal, seeing these two guys sitting in front of the Thunder backdrop, this would be a pretty big deal to acquire two guys that would fill such needs so well. And as Patrick Patterson talked about, he came for less money than he could have gotten elsewhere. He wanted to come and win. Felton said very much the same thing. Those would have been pretty significant pickups, and I think they are. But with the Paul George thing, it just pales everything, and you sort of lose sight of the fact that these two guys are going to be pretty important to what the Thunder big picture wants to do. I'm not saying Paul George isn't, but these are two pretty good players that are going to play significant roles for this team.
Yeah, and when you look at the rest of this roster, Alex Sabrina is going to be in his second year in the league. He's going to be a lot better than he was. Doug McDermott is going to be in his 4th year. Didn't get to play big minutes in Chicago. Not going to play big minutes with Oklahoma City, but he's going to play more than he did down the stretch for the Thunder. He's going to contribute more. You're going to see a better group of support around the Thunder superstars, whether it's 1 last year or 2 this year. It's going to be a better team, and it's going to be deeper, going to be more effective. Now, are they Golden State Warrior worthy? No, I don't think they can beat the Warriors in a playoff series. But they are going to be right below the Warriors in terms of the rest of the league, in terms of chasing the Warriors for second best team in the league. And the Thunder, I don't know if they'll get there, but they've got a chance.
And it's going to be interesting to see. We don't need to get into this today, but defense, something that I think we're all sort of interested to see. How does the defense evolve, and how I think you blogged about this, Barry, how they're probably the best equipped to defend the Warriors. Now, is anybody in great position? Probably not. But the defensive abilities they have on the perimeter, it's an interesting thing. We'll see how that develops, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more. But let's talk about the roster, Eric, for a second. You mentioned Samaje Christian a minute ago. Thunder currently at 14 players. Nick Collison's future's up in the air, Samaje Christian's future. What's the situation in your mind as it relates to what the Thunder's going to do with this roster at this point?
Well, it's sort of a conundrum, and I wrote about it earlier this week. Nick Collison is a guy that wants to play more, but there's really not a spot for him to play. He barely played last year, and he's facing a similar situation coming back to the Thunder this year. I don't think that the money is so much an issue because, the Thunder would be willing to pay him something close to what he made last year, to $3.7 million. If they were to cut Samaje Christian, who's a guy who can be waived by Saturday, and his contract would be non-guaranteed for $1.3 million going into this season, that could easily be allocated to Collison, and then the money would be the same as it was last year. I think the matter of it is Collison wants to play. He's a guy who's around 36 years old. He hasn't played much in the past few years, so he's basically fresh. He just didn't have an opportunity because the Thunder was so log jammed at power forward and center last year. So is he going to have to make a decision where he leaves the only franchise he's ever been with in order to go seek more minutes? It might be a decision that comes within the next few weeks, and then the Thunder's roster can be determined from there.
Barry, we know Sam Presti loves Nick Collison. He's done multitude of deals with this guy, structured him to work to keep Nick Collison on the team that he oversees. Is he going to do a deal to keep Nick Collison, or does he have to be swayed by having that third point guard, even if it's a third point guard that, if all things go as planned, Samaje Christian, he may not see the floor very much this year?
Well, it's clear to me that they need a third point guard, whether it's Samaje Christian or somebody else. I think it's fine to keep Samaje Christian. I personally would not re-sign Nick Collison. I love Nick, but they're up against the cap. I don't know that they need a 15th player, especially with the new contracts, the two-way contracts with the D-League, in which you can pay a couple of guys to play in the D-League and call them up from time to time, and you're only paying them a prorated amount, which would not adversely affect the payroll cap. So I don't see where Nick Collison really fits. Eric's right, he wants to play, but to quote our old pal Serge Ibaka, where he go? You tell me, where he go? I do not know where Nick could go and play. He's 36, and frankly, he doesn't move like he used to. And I thought when he got to play a little bit down the stretch last season, to me there was a noticeable change. He really wasn't the player he used to be. I think his career is probably over.
And
at this juncture in his career, he's really a utility guy. The Thunder really just used him against certain teams. There's typically the Clippers against Blake Griffin or against the Grizzlies against Zach Randolph. And I guess you could change it to Sacramento now because Zach Randolph's in Sacramento. So maybe the Thunder brings him back and he plays against Sacramento now. But Nick Collison was more of a utility luxury guy that they can bring in a pinch in certain situations when Domantas Sabonis was over his head, which we saw a few times last year, more than a few times. But Collison, the minutes just aren't there. Frankly, guys like Jeremy Grant, who's 23 years old, who's versatile, he needs to play. Even guys like Doug McDermott, who aren't going to get the minutes that they were going to get at small forward because Paul George is going to be playing a bulk of them. He's a guy that the Thunder is thinking about playing at the 4 so they can get some more floor spacing. He needs to play more power forward. Enes Kanter, obviously. The Thunder still wants to experiment with Steven Adams and Enes Kanter in those big lineups. Nick Collison's minutes aren't with the Thunder. They need to be somewhere, and that's what's tying this up.
My final question on the roster situation, Barry, you mentioned this before, carrying 15 or maybe carrying only 14 guys. Is that a likelihood with the numbers we see on the salary and how the Thunder is going to use those guys that are already under contract and tied up here?
I think it is because the Thunder would like to get under the luxury tax. Right now they're about $7 million over, I think, if they go with this roster. You don't want to go in the luxury tax for the third time in 4 years, so I think they'd like to try to avoid it, and keeping the roster at 14 would help avoid it. Every little bit helps. I mean, you've seen some teams that get down to, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 over or below the tax. That kind of stuff matters. So I think staying at 14 with the option, remember, of the two-way contracts with guys playing for the Blue, Dakari Johnson being among them, then I think the way to go is to stay at 14. But they never have. They've always gone with 15, so it would be counter to what they do.
And it's also an interesting idea staying at 14 because, in the event that they did want to make a transaction in the middle of the season, they could save themselves some money by, bringing in a guy and using some of the trade exception they already have as well. They have a nearly $5 million trade exception. So basically they could send somebody out, bring somebody in, they could absorb their salary with the person that they sent out and the trade exception, and then they'd still have an additional roster spot as well. So you might want to keep that open.
Okay, lots of things to discuss as it relates to the Thunder, the roster moving forward. But before we go today, one other thing was happening Wednesday night, and that was the ESPYs. And I know it's a totally made-up award show that ESPN has done, but had a moment of interest, I think, to people around here as Peyton Manning, pretty serious burn about Kevin Durant, said that he wanted essentially to be part of the super gymnastics team, the Final Five that won the gold medal so good. Sounds like Durant was in on it from some reports that are out there. Sounds like Westbrook may have been in on it. What'd you make all this, Barry?
Well, I think it was clearly a case that Kevin Durant was in on the joke. Think about it. The ESPYs They've become popular. They run on largely the participation of superstars. You know, there's no show if Durant, Westbrook, the Cubs, the Patriots, all those people don't show up. So you're going to invite one of the biggest names in sports, Kevin Durant, and then you're going to insult him. You know, all Kevin Durant has to do is get up and walk out, or if afterwards say, I'm never coming back, and tell all his friends in superstar land, I'm not coming back, and you shouldn't either. ESPN's not going to do that. Clearly, he was in on the joke. So kudos to Kevin for playing along.
Does this signal anything in your mind, Eric, that Durant and Westbrook would be in? Because it looked like Westbrook was likely in on this as well.
Yeah, maybe it's another avenue for these guys to talk. They haven't had a lot of conversation in the past year. I think it's always great when they can get in the same building together, whether it's All-Star Game or I was hoping for the MVP or the NBA awards, but for them to be together at the ESPYs, I imagine they probably had some sort of conversation at some point in time, and it's great for them. I think it's great for them to kind of make light of this situation, because the farther we get removed from it, I think the lighter it needs to become. It's just basketball at the end of the day, and Kevin Durant made a decision that was best for him and his family and what he thought was best for his career, and I feel like Russell Westbrook's doing his thing too. So, you know, if we can have some jokes out of it, I'm all for it. Let's have fun with it now. We're a year removed.
I think I was actually more surprised than the Peyton Manning thing to see what Westbrook wore. Now, we know what Westbrook we know what Westbrook fashion looks like. Green pants, white trim, some sort of gold chain in the middle of some sort. By the way, Paul George saying last night he's going to be the king of fashion. He wasn't wearing green pants at his welcome party, y'all. So, I mean, maybe, but
well, you don't have to dress like a clown to be the king. Is that what we're saying all of a sudden?
The jester.
I think Westbrook's got another level. We always put limits, or we try to put limits on what Russell Westbrook can do. We need to stop doing that. We've seen the man do a triple double. Next year he's going to show up to pregame wearing just like a lion's fur, and that's it. And then we're going to be like, oh yeah, you're not the king of fashion, Paul George. You're not even close. Russell Westbrook's wearing a lion's fur with nothing on underneath. So.
It's gonna be interesting to see though if Paul George continues in the vein that he had at his welcome party. It was a tailored suit, tie, sort of a interesting combination of like a light check on his suit, but plaid on his tie, and then some checks on his shoes or on his socks. So he wasn't sort of the reserved businessman, but he was definitely, sort of that tailored suit look, as opposed to Westbrook, who's sort of the avant-garde dresser of the NBA. I'll be interested to see how this continues and what we think in another couple months of these two guys as it relates to their fashion. Who are we to say, though, for crying out loud?
I think I'm well qualified. Thank you very much.
I'm not.
Well, we'll talk about that and much more next week during Thunder Thursday, but be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.